Well, I'm very excited today to have with me my good friend Mark Miller. If you don't know Mark, he's well written, several books on the topic of leadership, and connected for years in his role at Chick-fil-A. In fact, Mark, would you mind telling us, because I think folks would be surprised at how long you've been working with Truett Cathy.
Well, they're surprised because I look so young. But the truth is, I started on the corporate staff 35 years ago. I was the 16th corporate employee.
That's remarkable. And give me a sense of the types of roles that you've been in and what you're doing currently.
Well, I tell folks I actually have had trouble holding down a job because I have moved so many times. I actually entered the corporate staff working in the warehouse and the mailroom. And then I started our corporate communications group. I started our quality and customer satisfaction group, worked in field operations for several years, worked in training and development for over a decade with a real focus on leadership development. And currently, I'm leading a group of internal consultants, and we're actually trying to figure out how to help the business double over the next 7 or 8 years. And so there are 10 or 12 of us working on that project, and who knows what's next.
That's fantastic. And one of the things I've really appreciated about you, Mark, and it goes to the topic of today's conversation, is the fact that whatever you're talking about related to leadership and organizations, you're living it out yourself. And so let's just begin with this. The new book coming out in October is called The Heart of Leadership. And just what prompted you to write this book?
Well, this book has actually been more than a decade in the making because Ken Blanchard and I had the privilege to partner together on a project almost 10 years ago, the book entitled The Secret, What Great Leaders Know and Do. And that work grew out of our efforts here at Chick-fil-A to create a leadership culture. And in that process, we determined that we didn't have a common point of view on leadership. And that had to be our starting point. And so that first book outlines the skills or practices that great leaders need. In that book, we acknowledge the importance of leadership character, but that book did not address it because we've had a practice for decades that we're going to select for leadership character. But I've gotten feedback continuously for an entire decade of people saying, we want to hear more about leadership character. So this book tells the rest of the story, and that's what the Heart of Leadership is all about.
In your books, in addition to kind of teaching those principles, the principles behind character in this case, they're based on a story too, and easy to read, but the concepts that you're delivering are rich. And so this particular book, I mean, the bottom line, I don't want to give it all away, but it really is about serving others, isn't it?
Well, I think that's one of those key leadership character traits. We tried to pull back the cover and basically say, what makes leaders different? Because if you ask most people to talk about leadership character, they mention things like loyalty and integrity, and I usually stop them at that point and I go, hold on, those are character traits that you want in every employee, in everyone you bring on your team. And they'll quickly acknowledge that. I said, what are the character traits that make leaders different? In addition to the foundational character about integrity and loyalty and things of that nature. And we believe one of those critical character traits is the demonstrated ability to think others first. In fact, it's actually foundational. If you're going to be a servant leader, you really have to learn to cultivate that lens on the world, that it's not about you. Your primary role is to serve, and if you'll think others first, that will lead to appropriate action.
So, Mark, the great thing about the book, of course, is it's written for any leader, any potential leader. They can pick that up and begin to take steps in their own personal leadership development. But I want to flip for a second and talk about the organization. And I want, first of all, to talk about how do you hire for what you write about in the Heart of Leadership on the front end? How do you make sure you get the people that have the potential to lead like the leader you're writing about?
Well, that's a fantastic question. People often ask us about our retention rate. we're very thankful to have a retention rate of about 97% year over year for the last 20 or 30 years. And that's a corporate retention rate. And with our restaurant operators, the men and women who run the restaurants, we're very fortunate to get great people and to keep them. People often ask how we do that, and it really goes to the heart of your question. It's about selection. We think a good selection solves so many problems. In fact, it prevents so many problems. And your listeners can probably relate to that. When they think about the people issues they deal with, how many of them could they trace back to a bad hire, a bad selection, or putting someone in the wrong role? And so as it relates to leadership character, as basic as this sounds, I think people have to articulate those leadership character traits that they're looking for. And of course, our HR people would tell and have been telling me for many, many years, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And so if we know what we're looking for, we can look for evidence of that in someone's past. So back to the trait we've already discussed, the demonstrated ability to think others first. If that's important to you, you can probe for that. You can reference for that. You can interview for that. And then, of course, make an informed decision on how much of that you see present in someone's past.
And then once they're on the team, put yourself in the shoes of the leader, the supervisor, the person who's trying to pull out these attributes of a healthy leader. What does our role look like in that?
Well, hopefully, if we've made a good selection, there's not as much pulling out as there is nurturing and encouraging and recognizing and rewarding. It's a little heavier lifting if you have to start pulling it out. Now, the good news is I think it is possible, but it is very, very difficult to form character in adults. Much, much easier to do that in a process that most of us know of as parenting. That's when it's easier, not easy, but easier to create character traits. So with adults, I think you've got to be intentional. You've got to be deliberate. I think it hinges on a decision, and not necessarily a decision on my part and your part, but the person who we're trying to pull these things out of, they have to decide that they want to become the type of leader that people want to follow. The most critical step is for them to make a decision, and then our role is to coach them, to encourage them. And in the book, we talk about some of the specific things that you and I can do to shape our leadership character over time, but it always starts with a decision.
And so here's, I shared this with you a few months ago as I was reading the preview of the book. This line jumped out to me, Mark. Let me read this. It said, you wrote, "When leaders lead well, not everyone is going to be happy. If you need everyone to be happy, you should be a wedding planner and not a leader." So you mean leadership actually is hard work?
Well, not only is it hard work, and you know this from all that you've done over the years, leaders initiate change. It's at the very heart of our job description. And just the way God wired some people, they don't like change. That doesn't mean they're bad people. I just encourage leaders, be careful about putting men and women in positions of leadership who don't like change, because fundamentally they can't do their job.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you and I and all the leaders that we're talking to understand that progress is always preceded by change. And so you're going to have some subset of your fellowship that's probably always going to be unhappy with you because you've changed something, or you've challenged or pushed them to change something. Maybe that change is very personal. Maybe you've encouraged them to change something about themselves or the way they approach the work. But most often, it's about the programs or the ministries or the activities they're engaged in. To go to a new place, you're going to need new activities, and you're going to need new programs. You're going to need new ministries. You're going to have to discontinue things. And I've just found, although it's never my goal to make people unhappy, I've had to come to grips with the fact it's actually a byproduct of good leadership.
Well, Mark, I hate to say this, but about half my viewership just got a lump in their throat when you talked about leadership requiring change. So that's good. That's a great challenge. And with that, you do need to pick up the book. It's The Heart of Leadership by Mark Miller. It'll be out in October. And Mark, if folks want to follow your journey and additional writing, where can we send them?
Well, thanks for asking. I started a website a couple of years ago at the encouragement of my family and my staff and my publisher and my friends. And so I've been following in your footsteps, trying to learn about cyberspace and the blog world. And so I started a site called greatleadersserve.org. Now that's .org. If you go to .com, you'll find a youth pastor in New Jersey. But I'm .org, Great Leaders Serve, and I'm still on the path of writing 3 times a week for that site. So I would encourage your listeners to check it out.
Very good, Mark. Well, as always, I appreciate the opportunities I get to spend some time with you, and thanks for responding. They were tough questions, weren't they?
Well, leadership's a tough business.
All right. Thank you again, Mark.
Thank you, Tony.